First of all, I'd like to welcome to the gallery members of the fire services and retained fire services from a number of stations across the country. Needless to say, these are men and women who day and daily put their lives at risk to keep us, our families and our community safe, and they deserve our deepest respect and our gratitude. However, given the circumstances surrounding this debate, I would say that the men and women of the retained fire services aren't particularly interested in whether they get gratitude from anybody on the floor of the Oireachtas today, because what they want is the crisis in this service in which they risk their lives to be fixed, and to be fixed as a matter of urgency. There is a terrible sense of déjà vu in this discussion. The Minister will remember last November we were here having this very same conversation, and the reason why is because at that point in time there was such a level of frustration and anger among the frontline workers in the fire services that they had initiated the process of balloting for industrial action. And when they protested last November outside of Leinster House, and many of us, government and opposition, went to speak to them, they highlighted a number of key issues. They highlighted the appallingly low level of pay that many of them experience, the unacceptable organisation of rosters, making it virtually impossible for many of them to have a decent standard of living, let alone quality of life. They highlighted the crisis of recruitment, of retention, at times the dangerously low levels of staff on duty, and the need for this to be fixed. Now, Minister, when you responded to us last year, you talked, and I want to quote back to you from that period, you said that you have a real admiration for and interest in the work of our fire services for many years, and I don't doubt that for a moment. And in your concluding remarks, you said that what was now needed was the publication of the report. It was subsequently published in December, and the working through of the recommendations there to see how quickly we can implement them. We now want to ensure staff themselves have the pay, rostering and work conditions they deserve, and I am committed to doing that. Well, Minister, we are now 7 months on, and that frustration and anger of the men and women in question is now so great that they have balloted for and initiated industrial action. Not a single one of those people who voted for industrial action wants to be there. These are people who put their lives on the line for us. They do not want to be in this gallery. They do not want to be in industrial action. They want to be out doing their job. And the problem is the pace of progress has been virtually non-existent. That's why, yet again, my colleague, Deputy John Brady, who leads on this issue for us in the portfolio, has tabled a motion, again reiterating the need for government to take emergency action. This isn't a new issue. It's been around since 2005, it's been around since 2018, it's been around since the latter end of last year. And what our motion calls for is very simple: for government to engage directly with the representative bodies, for government to bring forward a financial package and a new framework for service delivery that provides for increased remuneration and better conditions for current and future members, and immediately to issue guidance for all fire authorities in respect of operational resources, including minimum staffing levels relative to the risk for various types of employees on leave and standardised recruitment. Now, Minister, only a few hours ago the government tabled their counter-motion. There had been some expectation, and there still is, that the government was going to say something significant today. There is nothing significant in your counter-motion whatsoever. It simply restates the position that you stated last year. So I'm really hoping in your contribution today, not for my sake or Deputy Brady's or the sake of any of my colleagues, but for the men and women represented here and paying attention from across the country, you're going to give us some indication that when those eminently reasonable demands around pay, around rostering, about recruitment, retention and safety are going to be addressed. Failure to do that today will see this industrial action escalate, not because anybody in the retained fire services wants to be involved in industrial action, because of failure of government to act. So we're going to be listening to you, Minister, very, very intently, and what we want to know is when you're going to act, what you're going to do to end this decades-long crisis in our fire services.
Brady. Thanks, Count Corla. Minister, first of all, I want to acknowledge members of the retained service who have travelled here from right across the state. To acknowledge that it's the last place they want to be. I also want to acknowledge that there's many other hundreds on picket lines across the state that would like to be here and certainly don't want to be on picket lines or here. They want you to do your job. I also want to acknowledge the work done by SIP2 and the NRFA in mobilising, representing the retained firefighters so well. Minister, just a few short months ago, we faced each other across the Dáil chamber during a debate on a motion on the crisis within the retained service. It was brought forward by Sinn Féin, and it was brought forward with the full support in front of a packed gallery of the retained firefighters. You, at the time, stated that absolutely there are issues within the retained fire service. However, you refused to support the Sinn Féin motion that was brought forward with solutions to the recruitment and retention crisis. You stated that you had initiated a review of the model of the retained fire service, and that was titled The Retained Fire Service in Ireland, the review of recruitment and retention and the future sustainability of service delivery. And on that basis, you would not support the Sinn Féin motion. And that report was subsequently published, as we know, in December last year with 13 key recommendations. And we are being told that government and yourself support those recommendations. However, the discussions between the representatives of the retained fire service and DLGMA broke down in May, citing restrictions put on the negotiations by Deepening. And the reason that there is a strike at the moment is simply down to the double talk by government, that they are willing to support changes to pay and conditions, but in the same breath refuse to implement the key recommendations around remuneration, citing the Building Momentum Agreement. The government are now telling us that the retainer paid to retained firefighters is an actual wage, while before this they were told it was an allowance, which had the effect of precluding them from benefiting from a 7.5% increase under Building Momentum. Instead, they received a 3% increase to their call-out allowance. So if the government is adamant that the retainer is in fact a wage, the onus is then on government to provide firefighters with back pay owed to them on the basis that they have failed to pay the national minimum wage. At the minute, Minister, retained firefighters are on call 24/7, 351 days of the year. Do you know how much they get for that? 99 cents an hour. Minister, what I don't want to see here this evening is a repeat of the plamazing that you undertook in this chamber back in November. That's what it was, plamazing and backslapping. Essentially, that's what it was. We've had enough. Firefighters have had enough of the lip service. We need to see some meaningful action from government, because it's down to your actions and inaction that have led to the current situation where 50% of fire stations across the state are closed this week, with full strike action looming from next week, Minister. Nobody wants to be in that situation, particularly the firefighters. Minister, we are now past the point of no return. In fact, the point of no return was 20 years ago, Minister, when the government of the day published the Farrell Grant Spark report back in 2002, which recommended a major overhaul of the retained fire service. That Fianna Fáil government of the day, and every government since, has simply failed to implement the critical overhaul of the retained service that's required. And that failure has led to the current recruitment and retention crisis that we see today. The retained fire service is broken. It's unsustainable, and if this government insists on continuing to ignore the very real crisis within its ranks, this crisis will lead to death or injury to firefighters and or members of the public. On the best of days, Minister, being a firefighter, a retained firefighter, it's a dangerous job, a very, very dangerous job. When presented with critical levels of understaffing to the degree which some fire authorities are faced with decisions to have to temporarily close stations, it can become tragically dangerous. In reality, most of all fire authorities are operating below establishment figures. In many jobs, being understaffed is stressful. It often means the smaller crew must work harder, to work longer hours, to be on call for even a greater number of unsociable hours. Minister, we need action. We need immediate action. We have seen deaths. In 2007, 2 firefighters in Bray lost their lives because of the failures within the retained service, Minister. I don't say it lightly, but the current situation is going to lead to injuries. It's going to lead to death unless government take immediate action. So I appeal to you. We have your report. We have your 13 recommendations. The least you could do now is act and implement your own recommendations immediately to stop this strike escalating to full industrial strike action, Minister.
Deputy Martin Brown now, and then really, you're all very welcome, and it's good to have you up there, but it's not allowable to applaud. So please, if you can stay quiet.
Margaret, Karen Corla, and I also want to welcome firefighters, especially the tip boys here today. It's a situation that they shouldn't be here. Minister, I was talking to a retained firefighter this morning who has a family history of being in the fire service, and he told me that the tradition ends with him because it isn't viable anymore for his siblings to come into that. And I think that sums up what we're actually talking about here today. A service that is understaffed because its pay and conditions, it causes to leak staff, and it's continuing to leak staff, and it reduces the available services, and which therefore deters actually new entrants from coming into the fire service. And in talking to many of the personnel this morning in Tipperary and outside the gates earlier on this matter, I was warned in no uncertain terms that there's every possibility that if this continues, worker safety will be put further at risk, and the service could not be lost to their communities. Because if you yourself were faced with the prospect of an annual retainer of €8,500 to be on call for 48 weeks of the year, to reside within a certain radius to guarantee a 6-minute response time to the station, then you yourself would find it financially, or not find it financially viable either, let alone something that would attract new recruits with young families. And when new recruits are thin on the ground, then so is the availability of these services. And just to let you know, you may not care, I don't know, but Tip Town should have 12 personnel running 2 pumps. Instead it has 8 members, which means that when providing for 3 staff members to be off at any time, they're left with 5, which is a minimum run with 1 vehicle. If their numbers fall any further, then they must rely on the nearest station to assist. Care and Cashel are the 2 nearest there, and they're all 8 miles away from Tipperary town. But these stations then, they're being put to the pin of their collars. Cashel itself has 2 pump stations every so often, precisely because of staff members. They also find themselves dropping to a 1 pump station as well. And in the north of the county, staffing numbers are also limited in services. Nina is short 2 members. They also lose a pump from time to time for the same reasons. Minister, when you speak, you need to outline a financial investment package which allows for the creation of a new framework for service delivery for retained firefighter services, and which provides for the increased conditions. And on the subject of the service availability, I would ask the Minister to examine the central response assessment process, as one station told me that traditionally they would be confronted with 220 calls a year. Recently they went a month without a call, and then suddenly 8 calls in a week came to them. It begs the question, what is happening in the central assessment process that appears to reduce the amount of call-outs to particular stations? And to conclude, I and my Sinn Féin colleagues stand fully behind our retained firefighters. They are always there for the communities they are committed to. They need to be shown the same respect by this government and from you, Minister. And the health and safety of these men and women and that of the public must be a priority. So there has to be no more dragging of your heels on this issue and get it sorted. Put an immediate funding package together and get this sorted now, and let the brave men and women back doing their jobs and not here protesting, because this is actually going on for 23 years. I see newspaper reports this morning, so it's time now that you stop dragging your heels and get it done.
Thank you, Deputy Brown. Now, Deputy Kenny, followed by Deputy Conway-Walsh.
Minister, I was on Leitrim County Council for 12 years, and during that time I got to know many of the retained firemen in my local community, and they are part of the community. They live in the community, they serve that community, and they are there when the most terrible crisis in life happens for so many people. And in most of Ireland, the vast majority of Ireland, when a crisis happens, when there's a huge accident, when something catastrophic occurs, who are the people we call on? We call on people who are part-time, who are volunteering most of their time and effort for this. They're highly trained. They have to train in the use of fire equipment, they have to train in the use of vehicles, they have to train in the use of breathing apparatus. And yet, these people are ordinary citizens who have to hold down other jobs as well. And when we need them, they are there for us. So it is incumbent on this government to ensure that the government is there for them, that we are there to stand by them in their time of need. And their time of need is clearly now, because it is very clear that the future is very dark for a retained fire service across the country, because so many people are telling me that have been part of that service, not just for a lifetime, but for generations in some cases, that they will not get others to follow into it, that other people will simply not give up the time and the effort that they are prepared to give up to be part of that huge resource that is there for communities. So, Minister, you need to act on this. You need to ensure that they are properly paid, that they are properly remunerated, that their pay and conditions are absolutely sorted out as was put in your own report, and follow through on it, and not just do it for the firemen themselves, but for the communities out there that depend so much upon them.
Minister, you know that we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't need to be here today. What has happened here is absolutely disgraceful, that we're here and that these firefighters have to come in here today, and I want to welcome them to the gallery. You know it's because of the non-action of Deeper that we're here in the first instance. I would ask you today to sort this out, and the reason I would is on behalf particularly of the firefighters in Mayo, there are 113 retained firefighters working in 12 fire stations who are on call 24 hours a day in emergency. They're highly trained and they're committed to keeping us all safe. And because of the lack of ambulance services and other first responders, they are often the first people on the scene of accidents across all of the roads in Mayo. So I'm asking you to listen. I'm asking you to get this sorted out. They put their lives on the line on the course of their duty. They have families too. They deserve to have a life. They're giving us a service that is above and beyond, and we need to remunerate them properly. They are not being given the support or the empathy that their role demands, and due to the shortages of other personnel, they are often the only people that are there. We are absolutely dependent on them. We rely on them for health and safety. We rely on them across our county and across the other county to save lives, and I want to take the opportunity here today to thank them for that. But that isn't enough. Their work must be valued and they must be remunerated properly, and it is absolutely disgraceful that we are here in the first instance.
Somebody taking the remaining 2 minutes, Deputy Donegal, please. Now.
Minister, I'll start with something that you won't disagree with. The men and women up here in the gallery and across the state are heroes. There is no question about that. I know you'll agree with that. They put their lives on the line. They risk life and limb. They are the people that you or I or our loved ones could call upon in our hour of need, in the most terrible of circumstances, and the risks they take are enormous. And they do this on top of other jobs, on top of other caring responsibilities, on top of a million other obligations that they have. They do that because they are courageous, because they are committed, because they are dedicated. But that alone will not put food on the table. That alone will not sustain them or their families. We need to ensure that they can sustain themselves. And it's for that reason that more and more women and men who are in the service are saying, I can't do this anymore. That fewer and fewer men and women are coming forward to say, I want to be a retained firefighter. So, Minister, the recommendations are there. They're not from a trade union representative organisation, from civil society. They're commissioned by yourself, Minister. They need to be implemented. We need to stem the tide of people who are leaving the retained firefighter service. I also want to take the opportunity in the time I have left. It would be remiss of me not to mention the issue of Ballincollig Fire Station. We have a town of over 20,000 people by the time the census results come fully out. Could be well more than that. It was not much more than a village when the station was first opened, and it is now come into this functional area of Cork City Council. The station is closed. The station is closed. And the people of Ballincollig and the whole city, because it's in the functional area of the city now, are looking at a fire station that is closed and wondering what does that mean in terms of the safety of the public, generally speaking. The firefighting staff are pulling their hair out. They've been pushing for a resolution for a very long time. I urge you to engage with Cork City Council to try and get that station reopened. But returning to the issue at the heart of the motion, it is very clear that The model that is there is unsustainable. The firefighters and the representative organisations have tried to engage to the best that they can, but the LGMA and, unfortunately, the government have not met them on equal terms. We need to ensure that they get the respect that they deserve and we get these recommendations implemented.
Thank you. Mr. Darragh O'Brien, please.
Count Corla, I move the government's counter motion, and I welcome the private member's motion on the retained fire services, as it does afford me the opportunity to bring some clarity to the current situation and hopefully set a pathway forward for all stakeholders. I do want to welcome all of the firefighters from across the country who are here today and have made the journey to be here, and those indeed who are looking in online at this debate. As many of you will know, I have gone on the record more than once about my long-standing admiration and interest in the work of the fire service long before I had ministerial responsibility for the fire portfolio. As many others have said, our firefighters are an elite frontline service staffed by very dedicated, by selfless people serving their communities around the clock every day of the year. And I know from my own interactions with firefighters right across the country, the work of these brave men and women can be physically challenging and psychologically demanding. They run forward towards danger and not away from it. And it is a privilege to live in a decent country that trains, equips and supports members who take up the public duty to help us in the dark moments when disaster occurs. It is a testament to their dedication that we enjoy that comfort. That spirit of public service is evident in the fact that in advance of the commencement of this period of industrial action, SIP2 confirmed that retained firefighters would comply with the provisions of the 1992 Code of Practice on Emergency Disputes, and I genuinely want to thank them for providing that important commitment. I would like to acknowledge and welcome the efforts of all parties during week one of the industrial action, and particularly the dedication of the retained firefighters that have served to minimise impact on the general public. And knowing firefighters as I do, I would not have expected any less from such a committed group of frontline workers. As Minister with responsibility for the fire service in Ireland, I'm acutely aware that retained firefighters provide an invaluable service that's essential to our communities right across the country. I'm also conscious of the special responsibility that places on me to ensure that the men and women of this service are provided for and empowered to carry out their duties. It is a responsibility that I undertake with the utmost seriousness. From conversations I have had myself with retained firefighters, I have from some time been acutely aware of the challenges associated with both recruitment and with retention of retained fire personnel being experienced right across the country. It was for this reason that I requested the National Directorate for Fire and Emergency Management to review the delivery and sustainability of the local retained fire services, with particular emphasis on the recruitment and retention of staff. The report that's been alluded to was published in December 2022. It contained 13 recommendations aimed at improving the retained fire service delivery model and addressing the issues around retention and recruitment. I brought a memo to Government in early January to note the issues raised in the retained review, along with the 13 recommendations outlined in it that are designed to resolve many of the issues that we're discussing here this evening, all of which were accepted by Government. Recommendations around revising the service delivery model were identified as the key priority for both unions and management. And building on that report, the LGMA and my department were fully engaged and listened to the concerns raised on behalf of the firefighters. And to this end, the LGMA engaged in a series of meetings and presented a revised model for service delivery with the following key features: an increase in staff of approximately 20% to provide a minimum 12 firefighters in all stations, structured time off, individual flexibility with regard to availability, 50 additional promotional positions, flexibility to attend calls when scheduled on leave if desired, and no reduction to the retainer payment. The proposals tabled were in the context of greater flexibility to allow retained firefighters have opportunities, and rightly so, for more personal time to use for additional employment, family work-life balance as desired. At the second plenary meeting chaired by Ultan Courtney last month, SIP2 did welcome the revised model. However, they clearly stated that their members had an expectation of a significant increase in pay, which had not been addressed in the tabled proposals. The LGMA clarified that a pay increase could not be considered outside the current National Collective Public Pay Agreement, the Building Momentum structures. And in an effort to work with SIP2 and to come to an equitable agreement, the LGMA proposed some rebalancing of pay that would include a widening of the premium hours and additional fixed earnings potential in the areas of pre-incident planning and home fire safety visits. It's very important to note that substantial progress was made between the parties during these initial talks to agree a revised composite agreement to standardise future employment terms and conditions, including the provision of greater work-life balance that would enable a retained firefighter to be away from their station fireground area for up to 20 weeks of the year. There is a strong foundation to build on.
I apologise for disrupting the flow of the Minister's speech. Is there a copy of the Minister's speech so that we can...
Yeah, it'll be circulated.
Yes, there should be.
Thank you.
I understand the key outstanding issue on this dispute is the retainer payment. I want to give some context to that before trying to move it forward. Every member of the House is familiar with public service agreements and how they work. You all know that the rates of pay for public sector employees are set by collective agreements. They're put in place to ensure that public sector pay is managed sustainably and in a climate of industrial peace. In practice, this means that despite what I or union representatives might like to see as the ideal scenario, it's not within our gift to make an exception or to operate outside the terms of the National Public Pay Service policy. That type of selectivity would completely unravel the collective approach that has served us well and helped to share our prosperity without industrial action that would jeopardise it. We have to jump together or we will fall separately. There is, however, a pathway forward that meets firefighter needs and protects the integrity of the collective pay process. I do not believe that there is an appetite out there within the retained brigades, local authority employers, or indeed my own department for this action to continue indefinitely. We all want to protect our communities, to keep them safe and be there to support them through times of need. However, it is clear, and very clear to me, that the issue of the fixed element of retained firefighter remuneration needs to be addressed to meet the legitimate needs of firefighters. And in good faith here this evening, I want to state clearly and as simply as possible my personal commitment to ensuring that the retainer payment is positively dealt with within the upcoming national pay talks. I know firefighters are frustrated, but I hope you can see by the bona fides in prioritising this issue and supporting you since I've come into office. I directed the recent review to be carried out, fully accepting the findings and recommendations, and have discussed it at length with my government colleagues who have confirmed their broad support for its objectives. I will be a strong advocate for and champion of the firefighters on the retainer issue in the upcoming collective pay talks, and I am confident the retainer issue will be positively dealt with and form a basis to ensure we can continue to attract and, very important, to retain firefighters in the service. To move this forward and avert the escalation of the dispute that nobody wants, and I understand that, I'm calling on SIPTU to re-engage with the WRC, to copper fasten and secure progress on conditions made to date and work towards finalising these issues and securing them a new pay agreement in the overall national pay talks in the autumn. I also accept that the driver-mechanic role is a genuine issue for the firefighters, and I've instructed my officials to review this matter with a view to reaching an agreement with SIPTU on it. As well as that, premium hours will be reviewed with a view to further extending them if this engagement can be entered into this week. Engagement at the WRC is the route out of industrial relations dead ends. We can ensure conditions are improved, and I will ensure that. Contentious reform elements that are eliminated, the service strengthened, and the pay then resolved in the national pay format talks. This can be done quickly without escalating the dispute further to another level that will not serve firefighters or indeed the public. Further escalation will only entrench positions and make it harder, not easier, to reach an agreement while placing further pressure on public protection. I am asking SIPTU to continue in the spirit of positive engagement that they have shown to date and to urgently re-engage with the employer side on behalf of the retained firefighters through the established industrial relations mechanisms. We will formally write to them to convey this and seek the WRC engagement by the end of this week. The right to strike is a part of the lifeblood of our democracy, but compromise is the beating heart of it. We need to talk to each other and to work together to move forward. And I hope firefighters will meet this proposal in the spirit of reconciliation and determination in which it is offered. I hope we can continue to cooperate on building a fire service that protects communities and recognises the work of its members.
Thank you, Minister. I return at Sinn Féin, Deputy Board McLaughlin.
Minister, I think you've got the immediate reaction of firefighters to what you've said. They've walked out of the public gallery in response to your words because you gave pretty much the same speech here last November. And I have to say, I think there's absolute tone deafness in the likes of the LGMA, in your department and in your government. How can you possibly connect the working paying conditions that have been so well told to the people of Ireland over the last week on our public airwaves, the shocking conditions where they are supposed to be available 50 weeks of the year, 24/7, within 3 kilometres of their station, with the type of paying conditions that they have? How can you possibly compare them with every other public sector worker? That's the point. They have very separate pay and conditions and treatment from all other public sector workers. How can they possibly be undermining a collective pay agreement to deal with that issue, to treat them fairly, to treat them with the dignity and fairness that they respect? I find it astonishing for anybody on one side of the negotiation to say, if we now give you parity of treatment and dignity with all of our public sector workers, you know, that there's something that would be breaking a deal. Tell me what public sector worker, name one public sector worker that would object to treating those firefighters properly. Name one public sector worker that would say, I'm sorry, you've broken the collective pay agreement because they have been treated at last properly, fairly. I mean, this is 1950s arrangement. You know, back in the day where you might have been asking maybe a mechanic or a farmer in a village to respond, like a community service back in the day. This is now 2023. People have to put a roof over their head. They have to look after their family. They have to deal with, massive, you know all about this, house prices, rent prices. You know, seriously, we have taken the salt of the earth of our country for granted for far too long. These are people with civic pride. You know that they're agonising about this strike because if a fire happens in their community or a road traffic collision, they know the people involved. It's absolutely agonising to force people like on the strike. So, Minister, please don't come up with this nonsense about the collective agreement being broken to do the right thing by firefighters. You've got to pull back from that position and do it urgently. You know, it's an awful situation we're in here.
Claire?
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. And again, I have to note that the only person in the room who seems to have a copy of the Minister's speech is the Minister himself. If that could be made available as soon as possible, Minister, it's very unbecoming. It is a damning indictment of the continued failures of successive governments.
The Minister has come into this House and not furnished us with a copy when there were details within his speech which are very pertinent to this debate, which we are to react to in real time. It shows a fundamental disrespect to this House.
It is a damning indictment of continued failures of successive governments that this situation has been allowed to develop. The asks of our retained firefighters are in the halfpenny place compared to the service that it is that they provide our community. And their asks are for a safe environment, an appropriate staffing level, decent pay and conditions that if you were to hear of any other worker asking for in our communities, you will be shocked and horrified that it doesn't exist already. Now, Minister, I heard you speaking of clear pathways, of memos, of reviews, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, from your only copy of this speech, you actually called for a spirit of reconciliation by the firefighters themselves. The people who are standing out there protesting to ensure that our retained fire services are the best that they can be. You want them to engage in reconciliation. I truly, truly hope I heard you wrong, because if I didn't, that beggars belief. Really, it does. This is a dangerous job that these men and women do, and that job is made even more dangerous when they are forced to operate at low crew numbers. Now, I have heard from government side over the last few days talk of investment in capital. Investment in capital and equipment means nothing Minister, if you don't have the personnel on the ground to be actually able to use them. Now, we recognise and we value retained firefighters on this side of the House. Minister, it is beyond time that those of you on that side of the House began to do the same.
Minister, I listened to the Taoiseach earlier. He was being questioned by my party leader about the crisis in the retained fire service, and he said over and over again, repeatedly, we value retained firefighters, and you've told us here this evening that you admire them. Now, they're nice words, but of course, if the Taoiseach and your government valued retained firefighters, they would not be on picket lines across County Roscommon, County Galway and across the state today. They have been forced into this situation, a situation they don't want to be in. They don't want to be on the picket lines today. They don't want to be up here this evening either. They want to be doing the job that they really love to do in their communities, on the front line, providing what is a critical emergency service in their community and for their community. And the question really has to be asked, if the government persists down this road of not listening to what has been said by the retained firefighters, where are we going to end up? We already have a crisis in recruitment and retention. Are we going to be left with any fire service at all in some parts of the state? Because that is really what is at stake here at this point in time. And the longer this goes on and the longer that you leave this for pay deals and pay talks and kicking the can down the road, that is the situation that communities are being put in. And it is at no fault of retained firefighters who are doing this job day in, day out. They are, in my view, being absolutely disrespected and have been for far too long when it comes to an issue that is literally life or death in so many cases. These are the men and women that put their lives at risk when they get that call and when they attend that scene. They're the ones that attend fatal car and vehicle collisions and are left to clean up what is left. And they do that for 99 cents an hour. They make enormous sacrifices, as do their families, to provide a life-saving service for their communities, and they do it for 99 cents an hour. And there are counties right across the state, Roscommon and Galway are two of them, that are hugely dependent on retained fire service. And these men and women are asking for fair pay, nothing more, nothing less. Hiding behind building momentum, as the Taoiseach tried to do today and you've done here this evening, is not good enough. If we value and admire these men and these women, pay them at a rate that recognises the very difficult, the very dangerous job that they do, and pay them at a rate that recognises their commitment to their local communities.
Minister, we're taking these people for granted, the 2,000 firefighters and their families for granted, and the government need to put a realistic offer on the table. The two counties I represent, Laois Offaly, totally depend on retained firefighters. I met delegates yesterday from all the stations in the county, and they outlined the crisis, not just the crisis that they're in, but the crisis to try and get people into the service and keep people in it. They expressed enormous frustration at the lack of progress. I addressed you last year on this subject, as did some of my colleagues here, and we outlined to you back at that time the situation we were facing and that this was going to escalate. The report is out over 6 months. You tell us, you accept all of the contents of it and the recommendations. And so do we, and so do the firefighters. So let's do it. It's not good enough for the book to be passed around. Retained firefighter model as constructed is no longer sustainable. On top of the recruitment crisis, the report found that 60% of the retained staff are considering leaving within the next 2 years. In some fire stations in Laois Offaly, the numbers are down to 5. And this is compromising staff safety. A realistic offer needs to be put on the table by government and the LGMA to avert this action from justifiably escalating further. If we're going to attract new people into the service, we have to deal with retention. It's impossible to recruit people in as it is, and to ask people to be on call 24/7, 12, 340 days of the year. And I heard the Taoiseach saying today to my party leader that staff numbers will be increased by 20%. There won't be, because you won't get them. There's posters outside some of the stations in Laois trying to recruit people into it, and they can't get them into it. They won't be gotten, simple as that. The simple facts is that you must deal with this issue. You can't keep kicking the ball around on this one. passing the book around on it. Some members of the fire service, I know this from some of my friends who are in it, they have missed communions. I know one member who was their child had communion, there was a meal afterwards, and the bleeper went off. He's in the station where there's 5, up he had to get and go on with the suit on him and to go out and fight a fire. That is not good enough, because they can't get time off, and you're not going to get the people. I'm trying to impress this on you. You're not going to get the people because of the terms and conditions that are there. It's really important that there's proper rosters. It's really important that there's proper paying conditions put on the table. And the last thing I want to say to you, sis, is about going outside pay agreements. Will you, for God's sake, stop talking about that? Senior civil servants. One senior civil servant got 80,000 of a rise. What pay agreement does that comply with? How does that work? I've never heard that explained to me in this House or anywhere else. Other senior civil servants are lining up for it. If they can do it, surely to God we can do it to the people who are on 90 cents an hour. We can look after them. We need to do it, Minister, and it needs to be done soon.
And thanks to Deputies O'Brien and Brady for putting this motion forward. I think it's really very important, and in the first instance I would ask Government to withdraw your amendment. The fact that it includes the statement that a high-risk environment has been created for the public by this action by firefighters is shameful. I say shameful on behalf of Government, and it needs to be withdrawn. Firefighters have taken this action because of Government inaction. I want to extend solidarity to firefighters in County Meath, and Navan, Trim, Kells, Dunshaughlin, Oldcastle, Nobber and Ashbourne stations, and right across the state. I was happy to stand with firefighters at Kells and Ashbourne stations this morning, and they don't want to be there. We know that. These are some people I went to school with, I played football with, I know my life, others I've met in recent weeks as they've tried to avoid this scenario. Their dedication is immense, huge mental and physical demand on them. It's dangerous work. It's work that not everybody can or will do. There's huge demands on their time, 24/7, 365. This suggestion from the Minister that there will be flexibility on the 2.5 kilometres, there will be flexibility on days off. There is a recruitment crisis. I don't know if you've realised that, and it's not just in terms of conditions, it's also in terms of pay. So we have a scenario where they cannot recruit into the service. You need to deal with all of it, Minister. There's no point in saying we'll deal with A, B, C and D. They cannot recruit staff. In Ashbourne, they had a recruitment process, 10 applied, 9 of them walked away from it. They cannot recruit and retain staff. They don't have cover. There's no cover. I met with them. You know, they can't go on honeymoons. They can't leave the area. It's completely unsustainable what is going on. And the suggestion from the Government that it's for the WRC, it's for collective pay agreement, I think is the firefighters themselves tonight voted with their feet. They see exactly what Government are doing. You need to intervene. In what world is a retainer the same as a salary? It's simply not. The Government need to intervene, need to address this. Gormagat.
John Hardy.
Minister, I don't know any retained firefighter who wants to be on strike. 8 months ago, I stood on the main street at Creasla. I seen retained firefighters, part-time firefighters, rush into a building that had collapsed. I seen them work through the night. I seen them work diligently, respectfully, as they recovered 10 bodies from that scene. Today, Minister, those firefighters are on strike and their colleagues. And why? It's not because they don't love their job. They do love their job. It's not because they don't love their communities. They do love their communities. They don't want to be on strike. But they know that there is a crisis in the service. You talk about extra recruitment. It's been said over and over again. People are not joining the service because of the requirements that are placed on them. €8,500 to carry a bleeper that says that you cannot leave your community, you cannot leave the vicinity of the fire station within 2.5 kilometres any day of the week, any week in the year. Now, we all got a taste of that during lockdown, during the pandemic, what it meant to be confined to a 3-kilometre radius. This is their life, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, missing out on vital, important issues, you know, football matches, christenings, so on and so forth, because they love their job. But they're making it very, very clear at this point in time that there needs to be an increase in terms of core pay, in terms of that retainer, to encourage other people to join them. We all recognise the heroism that these retained firefighters show. They show it every single day in terms of responding to the type of tragedies we see in our communities. They rush into burning buildings. They are highly skilled and they have a passion for what they do. They need more than plaudits or soft words from government. They need action. Now, folks, it falls on your shoulders. Those individuals who rushed into that building in Creeslough, the individuals who rush into burning buildings, the individuals who rescue those in collisions are on strike today. That should not happen. These are the heroes in our community, folks. And what needs to happen is the Minister needs to engage properly to ensure that they are not just respected, but they are paid properly in terms of the retainer that is being offered. That is what's needed here, not soft words from government.
Deputy Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. My time is brief, Ministers. I'll give you the live line that's going on at the moment, what's coming in. The crews are more angry now after listening to this crap. This government has just given a middle finger to all firefighters and their families tonight. I'm now 4 years living in a van because I can't get a mortgage or even find a place to rent. These are all live messages I'm getting in. I just want to start with, look, retained firefighters are first responders. The fighters do probably one of the country's most mentally and physically taxing jobs. But I also want to make it a point where bravery of station masters and stuff come out. I want a quote from Cork Bureau last week. I want people to understand the sacrifices we make. Cork Firefighters speaks out ahead of strikes. What is it going to take for somebody to lose their life before they realise changes have to be made? On Christmas Day, Middleton Fire Station Officer Mark Sinclair sat down with his family. As his mother tried to ask him was he on call, she couldn't get the words out of her mouth before his pager went off and Mark had to rush down to the station, suit up and save lives. Moments like this are just one example of the sacrifices fire service members have to make every day. It's a job that requires a commitment like no other, where only those truly passionate about helping their communities stay for the long haul. Mark goes on, he said that the firefighters must live within 2.5 kilometres of the station so they can respond to calls quickly. Mark said during the COVID lockdowns, what radius were we allowed to travel in? He said 5k. So I said, well, we have to live within this 2.5k all our lives. So what I want to say to you, Ministers, please, number one, withdraw your counter motion. There's been too much talking here. These people it's an undescribable job. They turn up at probably the worst things ever because they're first on the scene. I've dealt with them like everybody else has over the years. Whether it's a suicide, I can go back to 2002, my own brother. I actually asked the fire service, I said, and a Vanguard at the same night, I said, do you get counselling for this? No. So you can imagine the firefighter coming in, and that's the first thing he sees on the scene. We have really, I can't find a proper word for it, but so disrespected the people that we really depend on in crisis. So I would appeal to this government, for once, let's all do the right thing inside in this house. Because these people, and it says it, they're not my words, there's a very angry group summering up and bubbling up outside in this house, and you will suffer for it. So please do the right thing. Support our motion and withdraw yours. Thank you.
Deputy Brent, close.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, when I read your counter-motion, I thought you were simply not going to make things better. Little did I know that when you'd actually read the text of your speech, you would make things immeasurably worse. And the mood with which the retained firefighters present in the gallery walked out just as you were finishing your remarks, I think speaks volumes. And you see, there's a fundamental flaw at the heart of your proposition. The Workplace Relations Commission cannot resolve this dispute because in order for them to make progress on any of the issues you've mentioned, you have to deal with the issue of core pay at the rate of the retainer. And the Local Government Management Association don't have additional funds to deal with that issue, so that requires an intervention from government. You cannot increase the staff numbers by 20% on the current retainer. It's not possible. In fact, you will continue to lose staff. And if you continue to lose staff, you cannot have structured time off, individual flexibility in terms of availability, etc., etc. So the idea that it would be approaching this in a matter of reconciliation for workers and their representatives to go back to a process that is designed to fail is an insult. Now, our proposition is very straightforward, which is for the Minister to engage directly with the representatives of workers to resolve this matter. But the Minister knows, even if he's not willing to do that, he has other options other than standing on the sidelines like a spectator at Croke Park, urging people in national payment agreement talks to do the right thing. He knows it is possible for government to request the Labour Court to conduct an inquiry into a dispute, an industrial dispute of public interest, of national interest, and then make recommendations to government. That is the one possible route to deal with the concern that you have raised. But no matter what way you cut it, unless this government makes a very simple decision that the base rate of pay of the men and women of the retained fire service is not acceptable, and the only way to stop the deepening crisis in that service is to raise that rate of pay, and then from that to allow all of the other recommendations of the report to be realised. Unless you make that decision, this crisis will get worse. And Minister, again, you said at the start of your speech, as you said in November, that you have the long-standing admiration and interest in the work of the fire service. It is now within your power to stop the rot, to halt the crisis, respect these men and women, not with words, but with actions and with proper remuneration. If you don't do that, your words are hollow, they mean nothing, and this crisis will continue. I commend the motion to the House.